I get asked a lot about what the difficulty in 7 Days to Die actually does. People often seem to think that it does a lot more than it really does. And it certainly isn't helped by the fact that the names just give a bunch of flavor text explaining that they in some way make the difficulty seem harder. But it's actually quite simple. Difficulty in 7 Days to Die only affects two things: the amount of damage you do and the amount of damage you take. That's right, the game went that route for difficulty. But how severe are the differences? Well, let's get one thing clear first. The game says that adventurer difficulty is the default. And that is technically true. When you start the game for the first time, it'll be set to adventurer difficulty. This, however, is a relatively new addition to the game. In older versions of the game, Nomad was actually the default difficulty for the game, and that's where all the numbers on difficulty actually stem from. On Nomad difficulty, you do no extra damage and take no extra damage. It's effectively the normal difficulty in this game. Now, in order to show you the differences in difficulty, we're going to be using Arlene with a level 3 primitive bow with 2 mods equipped and steel arrows loaded. That specific combination is so that I can reliably get as close to 50 damage so that the tests are repeatable, as a lot of the weapons in the game are either too low damage to test well, or they have varying statistics. For example, 2 different level 6 spears can do different amounts of damage. Most basic zombies in 7 Days to Die have the exact same amount of damage along with smaller animals, ferals doing twice as much damage, and bigger zombies like bikers and tourists doing a bigger amount of damage than normal zombies, but not quite as much as ferals. Big animals do a lot of damage, but for this we're just going to focus on plain old Arlene, who does the same amount of damage as all the other starting zombies. On Nomad difficulty, Arlene will do 10 damage if you have no armor, and a fully drawn steel arrow from my level 3 bow with precisely 2 mods equipped will do 50 damage when shot at the chest. This is our baseline. So on Nomad difficulty, we know that there's no penalties or boosts, so Arlene does 10 damage and I do 50. So let's check out the default difficulty, Adventurer. Here, Arlene only does 8 damage and I do 75 damage. Now, I was a little bit sus of that 8 damage from Arlene because I was fairly sure that the damage reduction on Adventurer was actually 25% and not 20%. So I got a bigger zombie out of the toolkit that does more damage, and the feral biker does 40 damage on Nomad difficulty, and on Adventurer it is 30 damage. So my hunch was correct there. The relatively low damage of Arlene and the way that 7 Days to Die rounds numbers was slightly skewing that result. So her damage has actually been reduced by 25%, it's just not displayed correctly due to rounding, and mine has been increased by 50%, and that is on the default difficulty of the game. So that's how much of a boost you actually get when you play this game on its default setting. And then there's a difficulty lower than that. On Scavenger, Arlene only does 5 damage and I do 100 damage. So on Scavenger difficulty, you take 50% less damage and do 100% more. So where does that put the more competitive difficulties like Warrior, Survivalist, and Insane? Well, on Warrior, I take 15 damage and deal 42 damage. That comes out to 50% more damage taken on Warrior, and 16% less damage dealt. Now, after checking the wiki and testing with some other weapons, that 16% seems fairly accurate, with the wiki stating that you'll do 17% less damage, or as they would say it, you'll be doing 83% total damage. I'm happy to just go with what the wiki says since it's a relatively small difference that is likely affected by the slight bit over 50 that this weapon does. So let's just say about 16 to 17% less damage on Warrior. On Survivalist, I take 20 damage and deal 33 damage. That is 100% more damage taken and 34% more damage dealt, which aligns exactly with what the wiki says of reducing player damage by 66%. And Insane, I take 25 damage and deal 25 damage, meaning I'm now taking 150% more damage and dealing 50% less damage. And all of that aligns exactly with what the wiki says and what I originally thought, but it's always good to double check these things, especially when the 7 Days to Die wiki is concerned. So here's my chart on what difficulty does. I've used a plus-minus system, whereas the wiki uses a whole system. So for example, where I say the Insane difficulty increases your damage taken by 150%, that is exactly the same as the wiki saying you'll take 250% total damage, because 100 plus 150 is 250. So here's my system in a graph. And here's the wiki's system in a graph. It's the exact same information, it's just two different ways to look at how difficulty modifies things. Both will give you the exact same mathematical results, and both are perfectly correct. Just use whichever one you find works better in your brain. So is that really all that difficulty does? Yes, it's just a damage modifier, unfortunately. It's definitely a bit disappointing. Remember, 7 Days to Die does have some of the best customization options going. You can increase zombie speed at various times of day with walking, jogging, running, sprinting, and nightmare. Jogging makes them speed up just a little bit. Running apparently runs about the speed of a walking player. Sprinting makes them run at the speed of a sprinting player, and Nightmare makes them considerably faster than a sprinting player, but this is actually a pretty bad way of looking at it. The speed a zombie moves at is not just a flat number across all zombies. Zombies all have walking, running, jogging, sprinting, and nightmare animation says. For example, bikers, Arlene, and businessmen all have the same running animation, and they are the fastest zombies. Then a zombie like the green hoodie guy have a much slower walk cycle and a powerful running stride, but move overall much slower than Arlene's and the other small zombies. And then we have big boys like the tourists. Even on nightmare speed, these guys cannot move very quickly. Now I think there's a few other run animations that fall into the cracks of these three groups, but the short of it is that smaller zombies will catch you very easily on nightmare speed, bigger zombies will catch you but it'll take longer, and the real hecking chonkers just won't keep up with you on any speed at all. Another major difficulty modifier to keep in mind for zombies is block damage modifiers. Difficulty modifier like warrior or insane has no effect on zombie block damage, but the block damage multiplier absolutely does. And this can go up to 300%, which is very fun. And the last major factor for zombie difficulty that you can control here is the feral sense modifier. Now this is a pretty complicated mechanic and I would give it its own video ideally, but the short version is that it increases the sight range and the hearing of zombies. I haven't found the exact increase, but the devs have said it is more than double, and in my dives into the game files I think it increases the zombie senses by about 150%. But definitely take that with a grain of salt because I've not given it a full complete testing yet, but that is what I remember from when I looked into it a couple of months ago. But what it means is that zombies will hear you much easier and see you from further away. With regards to how stealth works, it seems to essentially work by taking your detection meter and multiplying it on the zombie's end. So being in the dark, moving slowly and quietly becomes even more important, and stacking up on those stealth perks and muffler mods becomes even more needed. So that's what difficulty does, as well as some other difficulty settings to turn on if you need the zombies to be even more hardcore. Want some more interesting 7 Days to Die content? Why not check out this video where I explain how to farm underground. Thank you to my channel members and patrons for making this video possible, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.